What's going on, guys? My name is PJ, and on my channel I talk about different ways that we can connect to our true self. One of the ways that I talk about, when it comes to connecting to our true self on my channel is through the Enneagram. Today I came across a book that I think ties pretty well to the Enneagram, so I wanted to talk to you about what is mentioned in that book, because I think the concepts that I'm about to share with you, when combined with the Enneagram, can truly help us tremendously in our journey of self-realization, self-discovery, and becoming closer and closer to our true self. So let's just jump right into it. The book that I found today and I came across is called The Sacred Pathways. And this book is by Gary Thomas, and it talks about 9 different ways that we can connect to God or relate to God, or how we can approach God, so to speak, and draw more near to God. These 9 pathways, Gary Thomas says that they're not based on the Enneagram, and I believe in the first edition of this book there was no mention of the Enneagram. However, in the revised edition, he added a chapter at the end that talks about the connection between the Enneagram and the 9 pathways. He said that basically he just observed through scripture and through his own studies and through his own observations, he noticed that there are 9 temperaments, human temperaments, that or 9 ways that people approach God and approach their prayer, their meditation, their connection to divinity, to God. And so these 9 sacred pathways are 9 different ways that we can all approach drawing more near to God and to divinity and to source. So I'm going to talk about what the 9 pathways are according to Gary Thomas. Then I'm going to talk about how I see these pathways relating to the Enneagram. And it's also somewhat similar to what he mentions in that added new chapter to his revised edition of his book. But basically, this is just my own observation, and from just briefly studying the concepts that he talks about in this book, is the first connection that I saw. And I'm sure that as I work with these concepts more and more, I'm going to start seeing more connections form, in which case I will share those with you as I discover them. So one thing that I want to mention in comparison to the Enneagram is that the Enneagram is a little bit more solid and fixed, and the sacred pathways are a little bit more fluid. So what I mean by that is our Enneagram type doesn't change throughout our life. It stays the same. We fluctuate in different levels of health. We may move, towards a direction of integration or disintegration, and up and down the 9 levels of health, so to speak, for our type. However, our primary type, our primary pattern doesn't change throughout our life. But the sacred pathways, they can change. They are more, in a sense, merged with one another. Yes, there's clear-cut separation between these pathways, but compared to Enneagram types, they are more connected in different chapters of our lives. We may really resonate with different ones. And if you've studied the Enneagram, you know that we have our own type, and one type, one description, or maybe 2 at most, will really, really resonate when we first read them, right? It's similar to these concepts, these sacred pathways, so to speak. 1 or 2 or 3 of them may be very resonant to you when you first read them, like it just hits home the moment you hear it. However, what I want to emphasize in this video is that the pathways that are the most resonant may not necessarily be the pathways that we need to integrate, that will help us grow in new ways, because they're the most natural to us. But sometimes in order to grow, we have to do what doesn't come naturally to us so that it expands us. And in a sense, what is natural to us expands. And people say growth is never happen in your comfort zone. So if it's not stretching you, it's not growing you, so to speak. And so the main point that I want to point out here is that in this video is that each Enneagram type has integration point. So for example, I'm a type 9, my integration point is type 3. I want to encourage all of us to look at the pathway that doesn't necessarily align primarily with our type. So not the pathway that aligns the most with type 9, but the pathway that seems to align most with type 3. Let's look at that, because the same way that that integration point helps me as a type 9 grow, if I integrate the aspects that are related to that type. For example, as a type 9, if I integrate my ability to take action, to take initiative, to figure out what I want, set goals for myself and go after them, the same way that integrating those aspects of type 3 helps me grow in my journey and become more whole and integrated, let's look at the worship style, so to speak, or the sacred pathway, the way that we can connect to God that is the most similar to my direction of integration, so that I can integrate that worship style or that sacred pathway, that way of connecting to God, into my being. And at the very end, I'm also going to talk about kind of like the bonus tip or the bonus little addition to this video that is another way to approach this topic and another more advanced thing that I think will be helpful for us to look at. So now I'm going to jump into the description of these 9 sacred pathways. As I've said, they're a little bit new to me, so I'm going to read them off of my phone. But, to learn more deeply about them, please check out the audiobook or the book Sacred Pathways by Gary Thomas. Okay. The first sacred pathway is called the naturalists. So, one of the ways that people connect with God is called the naturalists' way, based on Gary Thomas's book. So these are the people who love God best outdoors. These people worship in the midst of God's creation. They celebrate His majesty and discover spiritual truths through nature. I personally really resonated with this type, or sacred pathway. However, I knew that it's not my primary type or primary pathway, but some of my most profound meditations have been in nature, in God's creation, so to speak. So as I read these, see which one, keep track of which ones really resonate with you. So the second sacred pathway is called the sensates. These are the people who love God through their senses. These people worship through sensual experiences, sights like art, sounds like music, smells, and more. I personally felt like, now, Gary Thomas in that chapter about the connection of his work to the Enneagram says that it's not helpful to try to draw one-on-one lines, so to speak, between the pathways and the types. And I agree with that. It's not as clear cut, even though my part of me really wanted to find that connection. But I really think it's more helpful to look at it more holistically versus like, oh, this type is exactly this type. However, when I read this sensates pathway, it really reminds me of our dear type 4 friends, because they're very connected to art and music and creativity and artistic creations, and I felt like this is such a type 4 pathway. But again, I don't want to say, oh, if you're type 4, that this is your pathway. No, let's not view it that way, because then we lose the true depth of these concepts. The third way is the traditionalists' way. These are the people who love God through religious ritual and symbols. These people worship through traditions and sacraments of the church. They believe structure, repetition, and rigidity, like weekly liturgy, leads to deeper understanding of God and faith. So I think these pathways are really interesting for us to look at, because you truly can imagine, if you don't know people of each pathway, like it's like if you hear this, it's like it may be easy for you to imagine or know someone that really resonates with that pathway. And I think it's very interesting how there are so many different ways of connecting to God and experiencing divinity. And I personally really found this whole topic, this sacred pathways, I found it so fascinating because it gave word to something that I had experienced yet could not articulate. I had found that in certain times in my spiritual development, I really just wanted to meditate, be quiet, be silent. There were certain times in my life where I really wanted a good sermon, a good book, a good intellectual discussion to feed my mind, and something firm that I can hold on to. And in certain other times in my life, I really wanted to listen to a good song, a song that has depth in it and connect to something bigger than myself through that. And so I knew that all of them helped me connect to God in a certain way, yet I didn't have words for it. So I really appreciated finding this book today and discovering these pathways, because they finally gave word to certain intuitive insights that I had. And for so long, I wanted to make a video like this, and I kept thinking, is it connection of Enneagram types to certain religions? And I was like, no, not really, because you can't be any type, be in any religion. Is it certain meditation styles? Like, what is it? And this finally helped me see the connection, and the fact that Gary Thomas found 9 pathways and there are 9 types is just too awesome of a coincidence to ignore. So let's jump into the 4th pathway that he talks about. These are actually it's easier to read like this. These are the ascetics. These are the people who love God in solitude and simplicity. These people worship through prayer and quiet time and the absence of all outside noise and distraction. So what did that sound? What type did that sound like to you? I personally, when I hear that, I think of Enneagram 5s, maybe 4s also, but I think 5s more so than any other type. Now, again, I'm breaking Gary Thomas's rule here and trying to do one-on-one comparison, but it's going to help us when I jump into the last section of the video, which is the connection that I saw between the Enneagram and this. It's going to help us to start thinking in terms of, oh, what type does this pathway look like? People of what type would be more likely to follow a pathway like this and find God through a pathway like this? So start thinking in those terms, because I don't want to tell you these direct one-on-one connections. I want you to find them based on what feels true in your own heart, because ultimately that's what's going to be the most helpful for you. These pathways are such a personal thing. Our connection with God, our relationship to the divine, to spirit, to source is such a personal thing. So for me to say your path should be this, it completely misses the point. So, but I wanted to share these ideas with you so that now you can see all these ways that you can, approach God, so that maybe one of them really speaks to you in a way that you haven't heard before, but really resonates at this time in your life. So let's jump into the next group. The 5th group is activists. These are the people who love God through confrontation, fighting for godly principles and values. They worship through their dedication to and participation in God's truth about social and evangelistic causes. Gary Thomas really says that this one, to all of us, to most of us, probably sounds like type 8, definitely not type 9s, type 8s. And I would go and, say type ones also. If there's a cause that a type one really believes in, I can see them wanting to be an activist and a champion for that. So that is the fifth group. Let's go into the sixth group. Caregivers. These are the people who love God by serving others and worship by giving of themselves. They may nurse the sick and disabled, adopt a prisoner, donate time at a shelter, etc. And obviously, I think this sounds the most like type 2. I mean, the type 2s in one tradition of the Enneagram are called the caregivers or helpers. So there's a very direct correlation there. And the example that Gary Thomas used was Mother Teresa as a prime example of a person who walked this pathway. 7, another direct, I would say, relationship with Enneagram. The enthusiasts. These are the people who love God through mystery and celebration. These people worship with outward displays of passion and enthusiasm. They love God with gusto. So the type 7s in the Enneagram are called the enthusiasts, are called the adventurers. And this is, I feel like, a direct correlation to that Enneagram type. And I know my type 7 friends personally, they love dancing. They love, having not only like dancing and having fun, but bringing other people to join their fun. And they're super good at that. And they relate to spiritual traditions that are not so serious and dull and like we just gotta sit there and be quiet. However, side note, and I'm going to build upon this point a little bit more further down the road in the video, what doesn't come the most naturally to you as a sacred pathway may be the pathway that is going to help you grow the most. Again, that's just to reaffirm the basic point that I wanted to point out in this video. So let's go into the 8th sacred pathway. These are the contemplatives. They love God through adoration. These people worship by their attentiveness, deep love, and intimacy. They have an active prayer life. I personally really like that one. I think the naturalists and the contemplatives could be very type 9 like. I don't want, again, this is such a difficult thing to do, to try to make these direct correlations, and I'm not trying to necessarily pinpoint them, but just from my own personal experience, I really like that style. And I remember I was studying Jung's, or I don't know if this is Jung's. I was studying the 4 main masculine archetypes. The 4 masculine archetypes are the king, the magician, the warrior, and the lover. And if you want to learn more about these points that I just mentioned, read the book by the same name, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore. And also you can check out my video called, super clickbaity title, it's called How to Be a Great Man. You can check it out over there. But the lover archetype is the archetype that wants to merge with the wholeness of life, totality. It's like it doesn't want to feel like a drop separated from the ocean. It just wants to merge with the ocean, become one with the ocean, so to speak. And when I read the contemplatives description, it really sounded like that lover type. And the lover type, or the archetype, is very similar to the type 9 archetype at its highest levels, because it wants to merge with oneness, with unity, with love as totality, God as wholeness, as allness of creation. So I personally think that contemplative is very type 5 and type 9 in a lot of aspects. And I know actually let me jump into the next one, and then I talk about kind of my own connection so far that I've seen between these that I haven't mentioned. So the last one last pathway is called the intellectuals pathway. These are the people who love God with their mind and their hearts, are opened up to a new attentiveness when they understand something new about God. These people worship through intense study, apologetics, and intellectual pursuits of their faith. So obviously this sounds very like type 5s. I know I've mentioned type 5s a lot in a lot of different ways, but like I said, the sacred pathways are not as easy to one-on-one point to a certain type. I know type 6s are a type I didn't mention, and type 3s are a type I didn't mention. I would like to hear what you guys think in the comments as to what pathways align with those types. But I know Gary Thomas himself said that he feels that the traditionalist pathway is a pathway that really aligns with type 6s, in a sense that comes natural to them. But I want to also hear your thoughts. I agree with them because type 6s like when they have a clear-cut structure. And my direction of disintegration as a type 9 is type 6, so I can relate to that, to like wanting to have that clear-cut structure that you can rely on in times of stress, when your faith is kind of shaky. It's nice to have that firmness of conviction to go to. I would like to really hear your thoughts about which one of these pathways. If you're type 3, I would definitely love to hear from you. Which one of these pathways do you feel like is a very type 3 pathway? As I was reading these descriptions, I felt like the activists one could be a type 3 related pathway. But let me read these very brief phrases that align with each type, because I felt like they're really helpful to talk about as well. So basically, the naturalists are saying, let me be outdoors. The sensates are saying, let me experience. The traditionalists are saying, let me remember. The ascetics are saying, let me be alone. The activists are saying, let me conquer. The caregiver is saying, let me care. The enthusiast is saying, let me celebrate. The contemplative is saying, let me feel. And lastly, the intellectual is saying, let me think. So these phrases directly align with each type. I felt like they're very helpful to very briefly sum up what these pathways are about. It's like, for the traditionalists, it's like, let me remember what has been said. For the activists is, let me conquer. For the naturalists is, let me be outdoors. It's like that yearning is for that phrase, so to speak, of each of those pathways. In the last section of this video, I'm going to talk about the connection that I see between the Enneagram and these pathways. So just like the Enneagram, there's going to be one of these pathways, or maybe more, that really hits home for you when you hear it, when you read it. We've probably all had the experience, if you've worked with the Enneagram, if you've had the experience of finding your type, when you hear the description of that type, it's shocking and scary and highly resonant to an uncomfortable degree when you hear that type description. Maybe not everyone has that super vivid experience when they hear it, but for a lot of people, it's very shocking when they first hear their type description. That's how they know, like if somebody is saying these many accurate things about me, this has to be my type, so to speak. That same thing really transfers to these sacred pathways. There's going to be one or two of them that really resonate, and maybe 2 or 3 don't really align with your own way of being, your temperament. Like for me, when I heard activist, I was just like, I don't want to be going around, trying to like, so to speak, hit people over the head with a book. And that is super uncomfortable with me. But what am I doing right now? I'm making a video sharing something that I believe in and putting it out into the world for possibly, hundreds of people to see it. So hundreds of thousands, hopefully subscribe, hit that notification, but I'm just kidding. But it's a very activist thing to do, even though that pathway of the activist is not a pathway that really aligns with my natural temperament. Now, I wanted to talk about how the pathway that doesn't necessarily align with your natural temperament, but aligns directly and is natural to your direction of integration, or the wing of your type that is the less developed. What pathway aligns with that? Because I think that is what we need to integrate and bring back into our worship practices, back into our way of connecting to divinity, connecting to God. So for me, as a type 9, I'm just going to use my own example because it's the most, easiest for me to actually go deeply into. But I am a type 9 wing 1, and my less developed wing is 8, which is such an activist, right? I know my firm foundation, I know my firm convictions, and I'm going to stand up for truth, and I'm going to speak it, and I'm going to confront injustice. It's a very 8 thing to do. And 8, which really, the 8 really aligns with the activist pathway. So does, ironically, I think, my direction of integration. I think that's also a very activist thing, but in a different way. Whereas I think the 3 would be like, I believe in something matters to me, and I am gonna help people see that, but maybe not in as forceful of a way of 8, but with as much conviction. Like Tony Robbins, I've heard, is like a good archetype for type 3s. And I could see Tony Robbins being a very firm believer in something. And through that belief and through his desire to see other people thrive and grow, can really channel that activist energy, and with that firm conviction, with that firm certainty, bring that potential out of other people. So that truth that he believes, he can push it, in a sense, into other people and surpass their limiting beliefs and their barriers, so that it overwrites whatever they are telling themselves about themselves. Oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. Then Tony's conviction can come in and surpass their limiting beliefs and overwrite that. And his activism is done by believing in something, in those people's potential, and by that firm belief bringing that out of them. So I can see that type 3 really resembling the activist as well. Now again, this is still a relatively new concept for me, so I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments about what do you think the type 3 resembles to you. But what I was going to say is that the direction of integration and the wing that is less developed, what pathways align with that? Look at that for your type. So if you are a type 2, for example, your natural tendency will be the caregiver. The direction of integration for type 2 is 0.4, which is very much more sensate pathway. Like type 4s, I feel, to me, could be directly correlated to the sensates pathway. Also, I can see contemplative being a part of that, because they can be very inward focused and very deep emotionally. And so look at the pathway, if you're type 2, look at the pathway that is the most similar to you, to your direction of integration, your type 4 part. And by practicing that pathway, that is the natural pathway of a type 4, you start integrating that aspect within yourself and within your connection with God. And if you're type 2, again, if you're, let's say, type less developed wing is type 1, type 1 can be traditionalist or activist, I think, and start maybe seeing how you can integrate those practices into your life as well. And in this way, I feel like we can build a set of tools and pathways that we practice that we connect to God. Because with these directions of integration, with these wings, we know with the Enneagram, your dominant wing can change throughout your life. And we know that the health of your type can alter. You sometimes may go to your direction of integration in the sense that your ego programming has lessened its hold over you. So your higher tendencies that were blocked by your natural type's patterns are now more obvious. They're more pronounced. They're more visible. So when we start practicing the path that is in alignment with that point, the integration point, and also the path that is in alignment with our wings, I think that as we move through these aspects of our type, as we move through the directions of our health, as sometimes we get more stressed, less stressed, evolved, highly expressing our highest qualities, as we move, for each of those stages, we have cultivated a spiritual practice. So no matter where we fall on this ladder of health, we have certain tools that we can access in order to find our way back home, back to God, back to source, and back to our true self. So again, this is something, I literally found this book today. I almost immediately, I don't say immediately, but after listening to the book for a while, the audiobook, I started seeing this connection, so I want to come and share it with you. I want to add one bonus point to this video, which is what I talked about earlier a little bit. But let's talk about the direction of our disintegration. This goes very well with what I just said about the levels of health that we move as within our Enneagram type. The direction of disintegration is something that has become such a big deal for me recently in my Enneagram journey, in terms that I used to always see it as this thing that we want to avoid. Like for me as a type 9, I want to avoid that type 6 aspect of me because I've been there. I've been very stressed out and I know what that feels like. So intuitively, I want to stay away from it. But recently in my Enneagram development, I've been able to start seeing how just as much as I need to integrate my integration point, I need to integrate my disintegration point highest qualities as well in order to become the best version of myself. And I like to do a little play on words where it says disintegration, like D-I-S integration. I like to say T-H-I-S integration, like this integration, this integration as well. Integrate this as well. And I like to also look at the integration and disintegration point as two legs, and I need both to stand firmly and solidly. So the disintegration point has become a big deal in my own journey lately, and I wanted to bring it into this video as well and say that just as much as we want to practice the path that is in alignment with our integration point, the sacred pathway that is resonant with that, we also want to, I think it would be good if we practice the pathway that is in alignment with our disintegration point. So for me as a type 9, the disintegration point of 6, the pathway that I said would be in alignment with that, I believe is the traditionalist pathway. So really stick to the word, stick to what has been said. And I have found that when I consciously practice these, which I didn't have words for it before, like saying, oh, I'm doing this pathway now. But when I read the scriptures, when I stick to what's been said, the traditional things that have been taught, and I also learn to speak truth, I learn to be bold in speaking truth, even though it's super uncomfortable for me as a 9, the 3 aspect would get in front of a camera and talk about the firm convictions that it has and share that with the world. So integrating that pathway, plus integrating the pathway of traditionalists, plus not integrating, but just living and practicing the pathway that is natural to my type 9 self of whether it's the naturalist or the contemplative or whatever. I personally really connect with God through meditation, through quiet, through solitude. So those practices, and if it's done in nature, that's even better. But just I can just sit in this room, close my eyes, and feel deep connection with God. But I have found that just as the Enneagram says, as we fluctuate in these levels of health, it's good for me and it's encouraged for me. I prescribe this for myself to also practice sticking to the word, reading the words, what has been said, and having that traditionalist kind of aspect of myself integrated plus the activist, because as I fluctuate in my levels of health, I have found that like when I'm super stressed out, I want something that's kind of set in stone, written, solid for me to lean on. Just like the type 6 would appreciate a path like the traditionalist pathway. I feel like when I'm stressed out, I crave those. So if I have had practices with that pathway, then the moment I start falling into my disintegration point, I've already practiced a pathway that will bring me home and give me a sense of security and safety and sense of I am home. I feel God. And by having practiced that already, I have a holistic toolkit of connecting to God. So no matter where I'm at, whether I'm at the bottom of the valley or at the top of the mountain, whether I'm feeling great or awful, I have tools to access God from there. There's a story in one of Eckhart Tolle's books where he talks about this Zen student is asking his teacher about Zen, enlightenment, and how he can access enlightenment. And the teacher is like, do you hear the sound of the stream and super far away? And so the student gets really quiet and listens, and he says, no, I don't hear it. And the teacher says, then enter Zen from there. And he's like, what do you mean? I didn't hear it. And the teacher doesn't say anything. And I may be butchering the story big time, but this is how I kind of remember it. And then the student keeps listening and listens more deeply and more deeply and more deeply. And then boom, he hears the sound of the stream super far away. And then he's like, teacher, I hear it. And the teacher says, enter Zen from there. So basically, that's the story. Basically what he's saying is, no matter where you are, whether you're connected, sometimes we have great days where, we just feel the presence of God super vividly in our experience. I have times where I sit on my meditation cushion, so to speak, and boom, the moment I close my eyes, I just feel so connected and as Esther Hicks would say, tapped in, tuned in, turned on. But I have all other days, like today, where I didn't feel that connected initially. But God is always accessible to us no matter where we are. He has so much grace that we can connect to Him no matter where we are, whether we're at the bottom or at the top of the mountain. Doesn't matter. We can access God from there. Yes, sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's not. But when we have practiced all the pathways, we can enter Zen from there. We can find God from there. So I wanted to just share this with you, as I have found this topic, these sacred pathways, really encouraging, really exciting, and really awesome to remind us that the same thing that Enneagram reminds us is that there is no one size fits all when it comes to work like this, when it comes to transformation. Yes, there are certain practices that would be good for everyone. Prayer, meditation, I think those would be great for everyone. But the same reason that we pay a personal trainer more money than we would paying someone when we just buy an online course that's made for everyone, that same reason is that person's going to customize a plan based on us, based on our unique talents, gifts, desires, goals, all that stuff. And that plan is more likely to work for us because it's customized. That's what Enneagram helps us see, is that, hey, there's this 9 different ways, plus the wings, plus the subtypes, which goes even more in depth, you know? So there's no one size fits all. Let's approach our path of transformation in a unique, customized way. And I thought this topic was so exciting because it applies that same concept into worship, into connecting to God, into feeling the presence of God. Because I know from my own experience and having seen friends that the same path doesn't work for the same person. You know, I remember when I got back into spirituality, my main way of connecting with God was through meditation and quiet. A year or two later, I started going to church, and I remember just like they were playing drums and it was super loud, and I was like, people connect God to God here. And after going a few times, I was like, oh my God, this is nourishing me in a different way. The same way that you may like one food, you know, you may like a salad, sometimes you may like PB&J sandwich, sometimes you may like pizza, sometimes you may like hamburger, but you switch it up. You don't eat the same thing every single day for every single meal. It's the same thing with these pathways. You can switch it up and they will nourish you differently. So I love finding connections between things, and I just want to jump on and share this little concept that I kind of came upon today with you, just because I believe it could be very helpful for you. So thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps me know what kind of topics you guys really resonate with. And if you want to see more videos from my channel, please subscribe so that YouTube promotes my videos on your homepage and on your channel pages, so to speak. So thank you. I appreciate your time and attention, and I hope to see you in my next video. Take care.